Hello, BookTube. Sorry about the puppy behind me. She loves looking out the window. She loves sitting on the couch right next to my head, and she loves her rawhide chew toy. That's been a great hit. Uh, so uh, I suddenly have an easy way to get 4 hours of uninterrupted writing time, which is very nice. But I wanted to do the page 112 tag one more time, even though I just did one recently. This is a thing that there's a literary prize in France where the judges are given page 112 of all the books. And they're supposed to judge, they're not told the title of the author or anything like that. They're supposed to judge whether or not they want to see more of the book and hence generate the shortlist based on page 112, under the assumption that that most books are carefully vetted in the early chapters. That's the part that everybody sees. That's the part that everybody works on. That's the horrible, cynical assumption, is that that's the parts that most of the people who buy it are going to read. And that therefore you will get a glimpse of the writer's real talent if you go past that and look at page 112. And Sean, the book maniac, had the idea of adapting that to BookTube, where you pick 3 books and read page 112, and then, see what you think, see what everybody thinks. And I love the idea. I would love to see more people do it. It's because it's so much fun to read these things and think on your feet. The thinking on your feet part is important because one of the parameters that I like. I like the fact that this thing is mostly without parameters. But one of the parameters I like is that you should try to pick something that you haven't already read. I broke that myself the first time I did it. But I'm trying to be better about that because that really does make you think about what's the matter? Where are you trying to go? Ugh. Ugh. That really does make you think about what you're reading, if there's no momentum, if there's no familiarity. And I want to do it again because it's Nonfiction November. We're almost done with Nonfiction November. That's a month-long event hosted by Olive at A Book Olive and Gemma at Nonfic Books, in which they celebrate nonfiction and urge everybody to read more of it and sort of sing its praises. Try and get it out from under this cloud of boring work that a lot of people who don't read nonfiction tend to consider it. And I thought, surely in Nonfiction November, I should do a page 112 tag with works of nonfiction. So that's what we're going to do this time around. And then I'll give it a rest for a week or so. So we'll go to our first one here. He protested a whole series of outrages. The German, quote, rape of Belgium, the use of poison gas, the sinking of the Lusitania, bombing attacks on civilians, and taking hostages. He diverted huge amounts of church funds for the relief of war victims both during and after the war, emptying the Vatican treasury so that on his death there were barely enough money left to hold a conclave to elect his successor. The Vatican undertook a vast program of relief work that included the welfare of prisoners of war, tracing missing persons and soldiers, repatriation of sick and wounded prisoners to Switzerland, and the difficult business of exchanging prisoners. Benedict intervened with Germany to stop the deportation of Belgian civilians and tried to help starving populations in Ottoman territory. He spoke out on behalf of Christians in the Middle East, especially the Armenians. He also looked to speak on behalf of Jews suffering under Russian domination in Poland and elsewhere. His work was comparable in extent to that of the International Red Cross. Benedict's most important attempt to achieve peace was his 7-point peace note of August 1917. Morally cogent and well-argued, it failed to deliver peace because politicians on both sides were so mediocre and besotted with self-importance and crass nationalism that they were prepared to pay any price in other people's lives to win a war that was now essentially a stalemate. The peace note also failed because the papacy was still living with the consequences of its failure to engage with modernity, especially under Pius X. When Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph died on November 21, 1916, after almost 68 years on the throne, his successor, Karl I, began secret negotiations with the French. Parallel with this, the German chancellor offered the Allies peace negotiations with no specific preconditions. These were the German ambassador was afraid the U.S. intervention in the war. The offer of peace was afraid of the U.S. intervention in the war. The offer of peace was a way of trying to forestall U.S. action. Okay, so that's nice and clear, very straightforward. You can sense around the edges maybe the author has a small tendency to wander into the weeds, but really good. And then we move on. we'll do number 2. Let's see here. In late spring, when temperatures warm, the spores can survive this journey and afflict young wheat plants. Puccinia graminis. Puccinia graminis is the scientific name for black stem rust. Its south to north pathways are known as Puccinia highways. The second mode of attack occurs with colder areas themselves. In early winter, before the weather turns deeply cold, the fungus creates a type of spore that afflicts barberry. These can survive throughout the winter. In early spring, the barberry-type spores germinate, spread throughout barberry leaves and stems, and erupt through the surface to produce yet another type of spore, this one capable of infecting wheat. Every year, both types of spore, those blown up the Puccinia highway and those spread from barberry, assault northern farms in a double attack. In 1916, stem rust ravaged North America, wiping out almost a third of the harvest. Bread prices shot up in response. A year later, the United States entered the First World War. Fearing food shortages, Washington quickly moved to bolster farm production, plow more land, harvest more wheat. It extorted U.S. farmers. Posters appeared. Food will win the war. Stackman became the head of the War Emergency Board for Plant Pathology. He used his new pulpit to broadcast a message. Puccinia graminis was the greatest threat to U.S. grain, and the best way to fight it would be to wipe out barberry. As U.S. troops went overseas, Stackman persuaded Washington to let him run a nationwide campaign of barberry eradication, a pioneering act of large-scale environmental management. The goal was to exterminate the plant from Colorado to Virginia, from Missouri to North Dakota. Hundreds of thousands of handout posters and leaflets described barberry as, quote, an outlaw, a menace, a dangerous enemy alien. Brochures exhorted farmers to execute this criminal bush wherever it is. Barberry, government press releases claimed, is pro-German. Boy Scouts, church groups, Future Farmers of America, federal agents, elementary school classes, all were instructed to search for, dig out, and poison barberry bushes. Rustbuster clubs gave medals to children who informed on their brush-owning neighbors. Stem rust vigilantes tore out barberry with tractors, then poured salt or kerosene into the hole to kill the remaining roots. The Great Barberry Zap destroyed more than 18 million bushes in 17 states in 12 years. Okay, all right. I don't think I'm disguising my response to this second one very well. That's fantastic. That's just fantastic. Something that you didn't know about, described in a lean way in 3 paragraphs with amazing accessibility. That was just fantastic. The Great Barberry Zap. Okay, and then we move on. This will be the third one, and then we'll talk a bit. On the night of December 16th, 1992, several lawyers made their way to Barac's home. Did they all go in, or just some? And what exactly happened there? The events were already dramatic, with the clandestine deportation of hundreds exposed before it was accomplished, with hasty petitions compiled even as the names of the deportees continued to stream in, with the urgent need to get an injunction to stop the deportation in the 11th hour. What happened that night became a bit of a war story for Israel's human rights lawyers, and like any war story, it suffers from the Rashomon effect. At least 3 lawyers claimed they were at Barak's house, though none of them met there. Rosenthal says he returned to the house, quote, 4 or 5 times. The first time, Barak signed only a specific injunction, preventing the specific petitioners named in Rosenthal's petition from being deported. Rosenthal says Barak refused to issue a general injunction to stop the entire deportation, so he kept coming back, each time with a new petition naming more deportees, whose names had been provided by journalists or family. Barak signed each injunction he brought. Rosenthal remembers that during every one of the trips, Barak had him wait in the foyer, then return with the injunction, which he had written in his study. Dan Yakir, chief new legal counsel for the ACRI, remembers how Schaufman scribbled a handwritten public petition, ran to Barack's building, and, quote, waited in the stairwell until Barack gave him a general injunction prohibiting the deportation of all individuals on the buses. Schaufman says he arrived at Barack's house together with Brigsman at around 1 in the morning. Somehow, television crews were already there. Barack was on the phone, listening to the Secretary of the Supreme Court read him the government's decision allowing the deportations. According to Schaufman, he then brought the lawyers into his living room and issued general injunctions after reading their petition. Okay, so that's highly specific. And what is it doing in those 2 paragraphs? What is it doing fairly beguilingly in those 2 paragraphs? The 2 versions of that event that I just read, that this author is giving us, directly contradict each other. That's fascinating. The author is recounting both the versions and then pointing out that they can't both be true. That's fascinating, and that's the kind of vigorous, muscular reading of nonfiction that I love. I love it when the writer has not only sifted the material to the nth degree, but has then figured out the most vigorous way to write about it. So I would say that all 3 of these were good. So once again, my page 112 tag is working in my favor. The last time I did one, all 3 were good. I think all 3 of these are good as well. The first one is something we've seen on this channel before. It's by Paul Collins, and it's Absolute Power: How the Pope Became the Most Influential Man in the World. And that excerpt deals with Pope Nicholas, I believe, during World War I, and gives you a fairly good sense of what Collins is going to do in the rest of the book. He's going to be in the corner of the popes who did good, and maybe revive some of the good they did that has been lost to history. That's fascinating. And then the second one, also something we've seen on this channel before, is by Charles Mann. It's The Wizard and the Prophet. And the subtitle is Two Remarkable Scientists and Their Dueling Visions of How to Shape Tomorrow's World. And obviously that ties in directly to what we saw about the Barberry zap. We're talking about social engineering in the form of farming. And that it's not a subject that I would expect would be the writer, even like Charles Mann, would be able to make interesting. But that excerpt was interesting. So that's fascinating. And then the last one, I think we've seen this on this channel before. This is something I really want to review, and now that I've read that excerpt, I want to review it even more. It's The Wall and the Gate by Michael Svard. It's Israel, Palestine, and the Legal Battle for Human Rights. And that excerpt makes it sound like the author is going to take nothing for granted, deal with no easy answers, and be rigorous with the historical record. And that is why I absolutely love that. So in terms of page 112 for nonfiction, these are 3 pretty good picks. I could certainly have picked duds, but these aren't, in my opinion. So I'm gonna wrap up for now, and I will encourage you all to do a page 112 tag. There are almost no parameters. It doesn't have to be a book you haven't read. You just, but a lot of you have TBRs. A lot of you have at least 3 books on your shelves that you haven't read. This might be interesting to keep it to that and then see what you think. But anyway, I'm gonna wrap up for now, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.